Good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us. We were just a couple minutes tardy here, but that is not a problem. We were just getting our final graphics here fixed up for Biscuits and SEC Live tonight. We have a great show in store. We got a lot to talk about. We have been kicking this for a couple weeks, really a month or so now, to talk about our impact transfers. We talked about our impact transfers on offense going back a couple of months ago, which we're probably going to have to do an update on just because of what happened with the spring portal. We got some new impact transfers in on offense as well. But we wanted to talk about the impact transfers on defense as well. So we put together our list and checked into these defensive transfers who are coming in and could make an impact in the SEC. So we'll get into that. Then we got to talk about what's going on the diamond. Been a really interesting week the last week. And we got the final weekend coming up of the regular season. So that'll be interesting to get into. And then a little bit of the baseball hot seat talk as well, because as we come up here on the end of the season, we've got some coaches who are kind of staring down the barrel right now at a couple of these schools. So should be a great show for you. Hammer, how you doing?
Doing well. Yeah, excited to get into it. It's last week of baseball season or of the regular season. Football's in a dead period, so we can chat about transfers and whatever else. I was pretty proud of my Nick Saban presidential writing with a quill AI picture this morning in the newsletter. So go sign up for the newsletter. But I just he's joining that presidential commission. So I asked Grok on Twitter to draw me an 1800s style presidential portrait of Nick Saban with a quill pen. So that's what it came up with.
I think if you can get that and show the audience while I do our ad read, I think that would be great because it was hilarious. Nick Saban with a quill looking like a founding father, maybe Ben Franklin in the background helping him with NIL rules. It was a great graphic. It gave me a little bit of I don't know if a jump scare is the right word this morning, but I definitely got a chuckle out of it. I wasn't expecting that. I was expecting our typical GIF. So that one was pretty funny to see. But while Hammer's finding that, hopefully so we can show you guys, please do go subscribe to the newsletter. We write that each week. It's let's switch this over here. There we go, since I'm leading. Okay. So the newsletter is the Morning Biscuits newsletter. We write that each week during the off season. It comes in on Wednesday mornings, and then during the season, it's on Monday and Fridays. So that's written by myself and by Hammer, and it's all the goings on around the SEC. So whether right now we're in SEC baseball season, we're talking a lot about SEC baseball. We had something in there this morning about potential expansion of the playoff. There's a lot of talk about that. We'll probably get into that more next week or when the official news drops. So all the goings on around the SEC that you need to know about, you can sign up right here, biscuitsandsec.com/newsletter to check that out. That's one of the products that we are proudest of here at Biscuits and SEC. So please go ahead and check that out. And also, we are sponsored tonight by the Steer Agency. They have been a faithful sponsor of the show here for the last couple shows, so we appreciate that. For Steer, football is all about strategy, just like winning in business. Whether you're dialing up the perfect play on Saturdays or looking to dominate in public affairs, PR, or digital marketing, you need a team that delivers results. That's where the Steer Agency comes in. They craft winning strategies that get you seen, heard, and ahead of the competition. Don't just play the game, control it. Visit thesteeragency.com today and take your brand to the next level. Okay, shout out Steer Agency. Thank you to those guys. Were you able to find it, Hammer, or no?
Yeah, I'm just throwing it on a graphic real quick. It'll be in there in a second.
Oh, cool. Okay, take your time. But okay, so going back, so we talked about the offensive transfers. This was probably about a month and a half ago. I'd have to go back and look at exactly what our lists were, and we're going to need to update them, like I mentioned at the top of the show. But just to set the stage here before we show you the Nick Saban graphic, there's a lot of movement, obviously, right? The SEC has brought in a ton of transfers. The transfer portal now is just absolutely ridiculous how many guys are going which way. So it's hard to even really keep track of it while it's all going on. We do the best we can. We put it in the newsletter each week, just talking about who's going where. Transfer portal windows are opened. However, now when we go back and do these things, and as we start getting more towards the season, we'll write our 16 and 16s, doing a deep dive into each program. I was looking at these lists of just defensive guys, right? And we kind of like eliminated 3-stars. I'm sure there'll be some 3-stars that will really surprise us, but mostly we're just looking at the guys who are 4 and 5 stars to get a quick read on them. There's a ridiculous amount of guys who we could have picked for these lists tonight. We had, LSU off the top of my head, they had 6 4-star transfers on defense. Bama had 3, A&M had 3, UT had 3, Kentucky had 3. So just go down the list. I think we've got 30-ish transfers on the defensive side of the ball that are 4 and 5 stars at these different respective programs. So a lot of names to potentially choose from and put our list together. So it'll be fun to get into it. All right. Do we have it?
Yeah.
Still have trouble.
No, hold on. It's loading into the overlays now. Okay.
Rick and Bonnie, how's it going? Good to see you guys tonight. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, it says the upload is taking too long, so that's fun.
Okay.
All right, now I think it's about to show up.
Okay.
There it is.
There it is. There's President Saban, a founding father of the NIL Commission with President Trump. So anyway, those are the shenanigans you can look forward to in the Biscuits and SEC newsletter each week. We try to make it fun and light, along with serious news at times as well. So hope you guys will check out the Biscuits and SEC newsletter. Again, you can sign up there, biscuitsandsec.com/newsletter. So, all right. I think with that, that table setter there, we can probably just get right into it. We can start with your list and we can go, let's start with the first one off your list, Hammer. We can go through it just a little bit and then you can give us a little bit of color as to why you chose that. And then we'll go over to my list and check in on that. So, like I said, there's a lot that we could have chosen from. There's going to be a lot of guys who potentially are going to make really big impacts. But there's also some really big names out there, which is kind of what I took a peek at your list. Some big ones that I think really could make an impact here. So just to start it off quick, you had Patrick Payton there at edge. He's coming from Florida State to LSU. That's a big name right off the bat. So give us a little bit of color there.
Yeah. So, for those of y'all that follow this very closely, you'll probably notice a trend in my list, and that is it's kind of chalk, meaning these guys were all pretty highly rated by 247 in the portal, all, I believe, 4 and 5 star guys. So reason being is I think 247 does an excellent job. And so obviously I'm going to lean on them. Also, as you mentioned, there are so many guys in there, it's hard to really keep track of. So for me, when I was looking into this, I kind of just thought, all right, I just need to, look at like the top 10 to 15 guys according to 247. And then from there kind of narrow it down, because I could spend all day trying to find a diamond in a rough, and I have a day job. So I don't have all day to grind out the transfer portal happenings and see who I really think is, possibly going to be a diamond in a rough. And so I kind of went with most of the higher rated guys. So yeah, to start out with Patrick Payton, obviously FSU had a disastrous season a year ago, but he, the reason I put him number one is, a lot of these guys that enter the portal, it's based on potential and their high school rating, right? Where they went to whatever school they went to and spent a year, in some cases 2, didn't play much, hit the portal, and their rating is kind of based on, well, they were a good recruit in high school and they didn't really see the field too much or didn't do a whole lot. So we still think they have potential. Whereas Payton actually produced for 3 years. So he was a starter really for 3 years at FSU. Had 109 tackles and 16 sacks across 3 seasons. So he's been productive every year. He has for a defensive lineman or an edge, 109 tackles is quite good, meaning he's on the field a lot and he's making an impact. And then 16 sacks is not like jump off the page. Great production over 3 years, but it means he's getting to the quarterback, on average, whatever that would be, more than 5 times, 5.5 times a year, which is pretty good. A&M just had multiple players drafted, one in the first round, that didn't have 5 sacks in 3 years in his career. So he's got 16 over 3 years at FSU. I think he's poised to make a big impact at LSU, where they need defensive line help.
Yeah, that's a big one right there, right? Is just talking about the defensive line at LSU. There's been many guys over the years who have come out of LSU from the defensive line. They're absolute dogs. And for the last couple of years, they've had guys who have looked like they really could be, that next iteration of the LSU defensive lineman that is taken the first round of the draft, what have you. There's been a lot of hype around a couple guys, but it just hasn't really materialized. It hasn't really, the cream hasn't really risen to the top for LSU now for a couple of years. It's been a little while. So they really need a guy along the defensive line who's a disruptor. And it seems like, he's going to be able to do that. Another one you had on here I really liked was another FSU transfer. And if our cousin, JT Helfrich, if you're watching, I need a comment, buddy, in our comment box here, because what is FSU going to do? I mean, you're looking at all. I haven't looked to know exactly who they brought in. I'm sure that Mike Norvell did a decent job in the portal. But this is an exodus, man. This is rough. Losing Patrick Payton and then also Marvin Jones Jr., who was an edge at FSU as well, heading to Oklahoma. I mean, last year at Florida, so Marvin Jones obviously as well. He played 2 years at Georgia, 2022 and 23.
Right.
Last year he was at Florida State. But at Florida State last year, he played in 11 games. He started 9. He tallied 25 tackles, had 6 TFLs, 4 sacks, and a forced fumble. So that guy, I mean, that's another disruptor right there heading to OU. That's a big get for Brent Venables.
Yeah, I think you kind of nailed it there. He was productive last year at FSU. I think ordinarily a guy who's transferring twice gives me pause and makes me question how good are they actually. However, I think 2 things played into me still including him in my top 5 here. The first being, as we mentioned with Patrick Payton, FSU was an abject disaster. So I don't really blame him for wanting to get out of there with the assumption that, like, hey, this is not what I signed up for. I left Georgia. Y'all had just gone undefeated and got robbed of a playoff spot. And then all of a sudden we go 2-10, like, I'm out of here. So I understand that sentiment. And then on the flip side, Oklahoma, very similar to LSU, has massive need at defensive line. And so he, to me, is a guy that immediately steps in as probably the most or one of the most talented guys they have on that unit. And again, a guy who's been in the SEC before, played obviously at FSU last year, and just seems like a guy who's going to get a lot of playing time, which I think a lot of times when you're talking impact transfer, like, it's really half the battle, right? Because with all these guys, there's a reason they're entering the portal. And so wherever they end up, sometimes guys just don't pan out and don't really play. Whereas I think Marvin Jones, similar to Patrick Payton, is poised to play a lot. And so will he be a, top 5 D lineman in the SEC and a first round draft pick? Probably not, but I think he's going to be on the field 70% of the time for Oklahoma. And he's a good enough player that just being on the field that much, he's going to have an impact. He's going to have some production that Oklahoma desperately needs.
I would agree. I mean, I think too, like, he would be poised to, for the amount he's going to play at Oklahoma, he's probably going to start in every single game this year. I imagine, with the help that Oklahoma needs on the defensive line, he can surpass 25 tackles, 6 TFLs, 4 sacks in the SEC. Might be tough to break, but you can do it if you have the talent. He'll have the opportunity. Oklahoma's got a very tough schedule, as we know. So we'll see if he's able to do that, but it's going to be in front of him. He's going to have the chance to do that. And he should, going to have every opportunity, I guess, to really break out this year and put up an even better stat line than he did at FSU last year.
Right. And, his stat line last year, I guarantee you, Oklahoma is hoping and perhaps even expecting more. But if you give Brent Venables and that coaching staff truth serum and say he's going to repeat his exact stat line, they would take it in a heartbeat because they just don't have guys that did that. They don't have people on their roster that are capable of that, at least that we've seen. And so a carbon copy of what he did last year at FSU would be very impactful for Oklahoma.
Agreed. All right, let's run through. Let's just finish off yours, I guess, here real quick, then, and then we can hop into mine. So, David Gusta there, defensive tackle from Washington State. You had him at 3 going to Kentucky, and then Julian Humphrey there. Also, we can't forget Damon Wilson there at 2, Georgia to Mizzou, 5-star transfer, one of the only 5-star transfers in the cycle coming into the SEC. Depending on, I have one in mind, but 247 lists him as a 4-star, Travis Shaw, from UNC to Texas. But Damon Wilson, one of the only actual 5-stars that kept that rating, getting into the transfer portal and heading elsewhere. So he's a big one. He could make a really big impact there at Mizzou. David Gusta, as I mentioned, we talked about Marvin Jones, Julian Humphrey, Georgia to A&M. And then your honorable mention there, I actually looked at him as well. I think he can make a big impact on the edge for Ole Miss, is Princewell Umanmielen, brother of Princely Umanmielen, who wreaked havoc for Florida and for Ole Miss for a couple years there. So the one, I guess, we can talk about each one of those if you want to, but one I wanted to just start with there is Julian Humphrey. I mean, I think the kid's got a lot of talent. And, didn't get as much PT, I think, at Georgia as he would have liked, which is why we see him in the portal. He started a couple games, I remember, last year for him, and then I believe he got supplanted and surpassed on the depth chart. But heading to A&M. So the reason I say that is because I just have trouble with cornerbacks going to A&M right now, because we have seen this in the past where, for whatever reason, if it's a transfer from the secondary who goes to A&M from another big school, Eli Ricks being one last year as an example, coming from Alabama to A&M, 5-star cornerback. He had some good games, Eli Ricks did, but there were also some games that he was just non-existent. And just did not play well. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if that's the reason A&M is bringing in a Julian Humphrey, is because they're looking at some of their corners. They've got the blanket Will Lee on the other side from Kansas State, who played very, very well last year. But that other corner spot on the other side is pretty up in the air. I mean, you've got Tariq Chappelle coming back. He has played very well at times, but he's got injury issues. Eli Ricks, I don't want to say he was a bust just yet, but based on his performance last year, he did not live up to what fans expected and what the coaching staff expected of him. So my question is, can Julian Humphrey live up to that expectation? Because there's a lot of expectation placed on him coming into A&M, but the track record of secondary transfers coming into Texas A&M in the last couple of years is not very good.
Yeah, I think that's totally fair. This one was maybe a bit of a homer pick because I'm kind of hoping that he makes an impact, but you brought up, basically the reason he's on there, and that is A&M secondary wasn't good last year. I think you're calling him Eli Ricks. It's Des Ricks. Eli Ricks, I think was LSU.
Yes,
LSU, then Alabama. I don't know, but
he was a lot better. That's why it's in my head.
Yeah, but yeah. So Des Ricks obviously played a lot last year, but anybody who watched A&M's games last year, especially as the season wore on, you saw they were really vulnerable in the secondary, and I think what this says to me is exactly what you brought up, that they feel good about Will Lee. He had a good season last year. And then that other corner spot is wide open. Des Ricks didn't do anything last year to solidify himself. Tariq Chappelle missed all of last season with an injury. So who knows really what his status is? Is he going to be healthy? Will he be ready? And they have some other guys they've recruited, Javon Thomas,
Mm-hmm.
Marcus Ratliff, Bravion Rogers, but again, nobody that has done anything in a game where Julian Humphrey has. You brought up I think he started at least half the year last year for Georgia before, yes, being supplanted. And I know any Bulldog fans that are watching this were not sad to see him leave. But again, it's kind of one man's trash is another man's treasure, because the Georgia defense last year and for as long as Kirby Smart has been there has been on a level far above A&M. And a guy who can start at Georgia for half the year at least, and he played quite a bit really over 2 years. He got playing time both years there. Like, is the type of guy that potentially could make an impact for A&M, because their defense hasn't been that good. Their secondary has not been as good as Georgia's. So I looked at it as, yes, this guy lost his job, but Texas A&M's defense right now is at a different place than Georgia, and he very well might be, the second best corner on A&M's team. So that's kind of why I put him in there. And honestly, you can probably, if you haven't picked out a theme yet in my list, I can hit on the other guy on there, David Gusta. But essentially, I was really trying to single out guys that were rated highly, as I mentioned at the outset, but also guys who are filling a position of need, right? So as we mentioned, LSU needs D lineman, Patrick Payton, great. OU needs D lineman, Marvin Jones, great. He'll fit in there. A&M needs help in the secondary. Julian Humphrey seems like he could fit in well there. And same thing with David Gusta at Kentucky. So I'm not going to act like I watched a lot of Wazoo football last year, but they were a pretty good team despite the Pac-12 leaving them in the dust. And Gusta is a 3-year starter. Over the 3 years, he has the stat line of a defensive tackle, meaning he's got 1.5 sacks over 3 years and 62 tackles. But going all the way back to one of our earlier shows this offseason, Kentucky lost like everyone on their defensive line. And if you haven't checked the 247, portal that tracks the ingoing and outgoing, I would encourage you to go to Kentucky's incoming and outgoing transfers and see just how many defensive linemen they had hit the portal. I think it's darn near close to double digits. And again, not that they had a great defensive line last year, and I don't think most of the guys that transferred out are transferring or have transferred to top-tier programs. However, there is a gaping hole on the defensive line that somebody needs to fill. Somebody's going to need to play and, eat up those snaps. And Gusta seems like the perfect guy, because not saying he's going to be an all SEC player, but he started 3 years in major college football. He's an older, mature dude. Like, I imagine he's going to come in there with a very, workmanlike, business-like attitude that, hey, I played well enough at Wazoo for 3 years to come into the SEC. He's got something to prove. And, I think when you're looking at transfers, a guy like that can really be impactful, because again, he's older, he's mature, his body's bigger, right? We see this a lot with defensive linemen. Sometimes those 4 and 5 stars take a couple years to produce, especially in the SEC, because they're just not ready physically for what is coming. And this guy will be, right? He's going to be 22 years old. He's going to be ready. And I just think he'll step in and play a lot right away.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And yeah, so I was looking up a couple things while you were talking, but Kentucky brought in 3 defensive line transfers, some big ones, right? The Gusta Cam Olds is coming in. He's another 4-star edge. And then McKeese Humphrey Grace is coming in as well on the edge, who's from South Dakota, I believe. So he was a big get in the portal. Everybody was after him.
Yeah.
So they reloaded there as they needed to. Okay, we can move into my list here. So Boss Man's top defensive transfers of 25. So I put Damon Wilson there at number 1, really the only 5-star who was available in the portal or who came to the SEC as a defensive transfer in the portal. He is really just he's all talent, right, and ceiling and upside. That's the way to put it. He's got a lot of upside. He hasn't produced much at all yet. He played, I think it was like 80 snaps or something in total last year, if I remember correctly. So it was not. There's not a whole lot of sample size, but everyone has seen what this kid can do. He was a top 45 recruit one cycle ago, I guess, because he was a freshman last year, right, at Georgia. So he's got a lot to prove, but it's a big get for Mizzou. And he's going to get a lot of playing time, which means he's going to have a lot of opportunity to really shine at Missouri. And he's going to be the guy, on that defensive line. So I imagine that he will have a pretty solid year at Missouri. Jack Pyburn, I put him in there. There was a lot you could choose from at LSU, kind of as we led off with yours with Patrick Payton. But Pyburn is a 4-star edge linebacker coming over from Florida, heading to LSU. And I think he could make a big impact. LSU with Harold Perkins, right? We don't know what that's really going to look like. It's still been kind of an issue over the last 2 years. His freshman year was incredible. And then the last 2 years have been, but also he had the injury too. So what's it going to look like with him coming back? And adding Jack Pyburn, who is a proven guy in the SEC. So last year he had 60 total tackles, 4 tackles for a loss and a sack. And over his career, 3 seasons at Florida, he recorded 80 tackles, 5 tackles for loss, a sack, and an INT. So you can tell, right? He had 60 tackles last year, 80 total tackles over the course of his career at Florida. Last year was really his breakout year, and he was flying around the field. You watch tape, right? He was kind of everywhere. So I think that's a big get for LSU. Travis Shaw coming from UNC to Texas. He was a former 5-star in the portal this cycle. He was a 4-star by 247. So Texas, on the defensive line, that's reloading for them. They're going to have a mean defensive line again. They've lost some on the defensive line as well, so needed to reload there. And then I added a second one for LSU because, I'm looking down and they got a couple guys that they brought in the secondary. They brought in AJ Halsey from Houston at safety. They brought in Tamarcus Cooley, another safety. Another safety. And they also brought in, I'm going to read his name wrong, Mansour Delave. I think I wrote it down wrong. But anyway, he's a cornerback. So they're trying to really bolster that secondary, which they have to do. And AJ Halsey, it was a big get. He was one of the bigger, he was a 4-star, one of the bigger secondary targets in the portal. And many folks were after him, because of his ability. And then Kendall Daniels there, man, I remember this kid. I think you remember this kid too, Hammer, from A&M, because he originally committed to Texas A&M, his letter of intent, and then backed off his pledge, and A&M released him from his letter. Ended up at Oklahoma State and lit it up. I mean, he was one of the best safeties in the conference in the Big 12 last year. And if you watch any of his tape, man, that kid brings the wood. He lays the hammer. And so it's interesting to see him transfer from Oklahoma State to rival Oklahoma. Oklahoma was absolutely after him. It actually came down to OU and A&M in that original recruitment, and he chose A&M over Oklahoma, and then left and then decided to go to Oklahoma State. So his recruitment was odd, but then he ended up at Oklahoma State for, I think, 3 years, and really just was an animal in the secondary for Oklahoma State. He was their enforcer. And so it'll be really interesting to see him at Oklahoma. I'm really looking forward to that. So any comments on that before we finish out my list?
Yeah, so I like your Kendall Daniels pick. As you said, he's been a good player, very steady, very solid for Oklahoma State. I think he's ready for the SEC, and I don't think he'll have any problem coming in and starting and making an impact. I think the Travis Shaw one, also a good one, kind of kind of based on potential there. But you mentioned, Texas has some holes to fill. They sent Alfred Collins, Vernon Broughton, and Barron Sorrell. Had three dudes off that D line get drafted this year. I believe all of them, if I'm not mistaken. Well, at least Collins and Broughton were playing on the inside. So there's a hole in the middle there. Obviously, they have Colin Simmons on the edge, who's an absolute animal. But inside, where Shaw will be, I think there's a gap there that he can fill. Pyburn, very similar, I think, to Peyton, as you mentioned. Like LSU brought in a ton of dudes, and some of them are going to hit because they have a need at kind of edge, linebacker, D line, that area. He to me, I think you're right. It'll be interesting to see what Harold Perkins is this year and how he plays, but depending on Perkins, health, his recovery, and then just his general play, Pyburn is a guy that will either push him to actually produce or will just pass him, and I think would be a really good complement to Whit Weeks at LSU, who had a pretty good year last year. I think Weeks, he definitely flashes on tape, and when you watch, because he flies around, sometimes I think that gets him in trouble because he overcommits and over pursues a little bit, as we saw in the A&M game, and really gets burned. But those two, I think Weeks and then Pyburn, I think will be a pretty good tandem. And obviously, yeah, I wanted to bring up too on Wilson. So you brought it up. He's really based on potential. He didn't get that many snaps last year, but he's playing kind of behind Jalen Walker and Michael Williams, both who went very high in the NFL draft and are just absolute animals. So I don't think it really says anything about Wilson, the player, that he was not able to beat them out as a true freshman. So I would agree. I think Mizzou is a place that he can go to and will start, especially with the departure of Williams and Wari at Mizzou, who left. So I think he'll start and play immediately, and we'll kind of see, how good is he really based on his recruiting profile. But as it stands now, it seems like he's very much, talented and ready to make an impact. So really the only one that caught me off guard was Hulsey from Houston. I did not watch much Houston football this past year, given they kind of stunk, and it was their first year in the Big 12, and Willie Fritz was fighting an uphill battle. So I'm interested there because I think you're right. I mean, LSU obviously needs help in the secondary too. Their entire defense essentially has holes to fill. So interested to see that one. But I think the other ones are great picks, and probably all are guys, again, similar to my list. Like these are guys you will see on Saturday. The ultimate, impact that they have obviously remains to be seen, but I think at the very least, these are dudes who you will see on TV on Saturday, their name on the back, making plays and at least being involved in their new team's, season and game plan. So I think those are definitely all names to look out for this coming season.
Yeah, I would agree. And there's so many other names too that we could have added to these lists, right? I mean, so when we do like our deep dives on each team as we get closer to the season, some of these other names will pop up. You mentioned Princewell Uman-Mielen. There's also Deshaun Womack, a 4-star who's headed to Ole Miss, and just multiple other guys from even, some of these other schools that we're not even talking about, right? We can only pick 5 tonight for the sake of the show. But even like Cole Brevard is coming to Texas, another 4-star defensive lineman. They also got Marad Watson from Syracuse, a 4-star defensive lineman. Yep. So there's a ton of guys that we could talk about as well. Just to cap that off here. So AJ Hulsey, he was a Phil Steele All-American honorable mention. I spelled his name wrong, by the way, so forgive me. Take the E out before the Y. But we were making graphics very quickly tonight, getting ready for the show. So first team All Big 12, according to league coaches, the Associated Press, and Phil Steele tied for the lead in interceptions in the Big 12 with 5, second in the Big 12 in passes defended with 13, led the team in tackles for 3 separate games. So he was all over the field for Houston. So looking forward to what he's going to be able to do for LSU, because they just need the help in the secondary, man. It's been the case for a couple of years now. And that's got to be a focal point for Blake Baker. And if you look just through their portal additions, obviously defense was a huge focus for them, but specifically the secondary. They really got after it, got 2 safeties, got a 4-star corner, and a couple others as well. So I think Halsey is going to be a great addition for them, just based on what he did in the Big 12. And again, it's a step up here in the SEC, in play, and we all know that. But I think he's going to be able to translate that pretty well. And then Kendall Daniels too, just to touch on some of his stats. He played 12 in all 12 games at Oklahoma State last year, had 9 starts, 64 total tackles, 5.5 sacks, 7 PBUs, 3 QB hurries. So pretty solid stats across the board. And then the year previous, the prior year, 2023, he was honorable mention Big 12 and started all 14 games. Second in the Big 12 in fumble recoveries, 5th in solo tackles with 62, and 5th in total tackles with 105. So, I mean, the kid flies around the field. Also, I'd forgotten about this. I think I just wiped this from my memory for good reason. And he made the game-sealing interception against A&M in the Texas Bowl in 2023. So, again, for good reason that I, as an Aggie, I forgot about that one. And then finally, Brandon Sissy, I think is how you say his name. And he's coming from NC State to South Carolina. That was a pretty good pickup for South Carolina. I actually don't think that he's a 4-star corner, and he was well sought after in the portal by many schools. I don't think folks actually thought he was going to end up at South Carolina, and they made a hard play for him and then ended up getting him. So kudos to Shane Beamer and their staff for picking him up. Last year at NC State, he had 38 tackles and 5 PBUs and an interception. That was over 2 years. So the last 2 years at NC State, 38 tackles, 5 PBUs, and 1 interception. So some pretty good stats. Something to look forward to for Gamecocks fans. He seems like he could be one of the next great corners at South Carolina, who, they've had a run of solid corners over the last 5 years or so. Another good one to look out there for in Columbia.
Yeah, I mean, South Carolina is another team. I think they had 2 defensive backs picked up in this year's NFL draft in Demetrius Knight and TJ Sanders. So again, there's room for a guy like Sissy to come in and fill a void that is now gone and playing on Sunday. So I think that's a good pickup as well.
Definitely. All right. Well, if you guys have any transfers that we missed that you think, leave them in the comments, and we can comment on them as we move forward here. But we should get into a little bit of SEC baseball now. There's a lot going on in SEC baseball. It was a wild weekend last weekend, a lot of fun. We got our final weekend coming up here this weekend with some really interesting series coming up. And then we've got the SEC tournament starting after this weekend, so going into the next weekend. Remember, this year starts all 16 teams get in. So 16 teams make the SEC tournament. It's not double elimination like it used to be. Used to be, I think it was just the 12 teams, right? 12 out of 14 would make it. Now it's all 16 and single elimination. So this was last week's SEC baseball weekend, weekend 9. We saw Auburn clobbered South Carolina down there at the bottom. Mizzou went into College Station after being 0-24 in the SEC and beat A&M, who really needed a series win to get into the postseason. So that was kind of wild. So I mentioned those two off the top because we're going to get into hot seat talk a little bit here in a second with the coaches at A&M and South Carolina. You saw Vanderbilt go in and get a series win over the Vols in Knoxville, which is pretty solid. And then also saw LSU, who is now the number 1 team in the country. They hand Arkansas another series loss in the SEC. And then the other big one to mention too, two big ones to mention, Mississippi State beats Ole Miss and takes that series. That was a surprise.
Yep.
And then Florida taking out Texas. So Florida, 2 wins, 1 win for Texas. Texas a little bit. I think that's 2 out of the last 3 series they've lost.
Yeah.
Or is that 2 out of the last 3.
Two straight, because they swept A&M and then they got swept by Arkansas, and then Florida came to Austin and took 2 of 3.
Yeah.
Just teams that are trending. Texas, obviously, it's hard to say they're trending down. It's only been 2 series, but I think it is eye-opening, because we brought this up, earlier about how they hadn't really played a big-time series on the road. Obviously, they did in the Arkansas series and got swept. But I think more perhaps alarming for Texas fans would be they, despite their record, which nobody can take away from them, they're going to win the SEC regular season title. And they're going to host, they'll be a top 8 seed. So they'll host a regional, and if they win that, a super. However, they won a lot of close games. And I think that's what, I've just seen in SEC baseball Twitter, the people that are more into it than me, that's what they're kind of calling out. It's like, what, Texas is, although very good, most people are kind of betting on them, not to make Omaha, just because, all right, we've seen a little bit of back down to earth these last 2 weeks. And if you look back, they've won a lot of close games. That's just hard to keep up over when you get up to playing 60 plus games in the postseason. And plus they lost their Friday night starter. So that hurts tremendously, right? You lose your ace. That's tough for any team to overcome. So, that's a team that I would keep an eye on as possibly trending slightly down. Tennessee, another one. They've lost 5 out of 6 series, haven't been swept, but, getting beat 2 out of 3, 5 out of their last 6. Teams I think that are surging. Kentucky had a big sweep of Oklahoma and Norman. They seem to be playing well. They're going to make the postseason. So, not going to host or anything like that, but they'll be in there. Vanderbilt taking 2 out of 3 from Tennessee. Vandy back into the top 10. This most recent week's ranking, so they're looking good. And then Auburn, you mentioned they clobbered South Carolina. They're playing really, really good. LSU's playing well. They're back up to number 1 after taking 2 out of 3 over Arkansas. And then shout out to our friend Jake Thomas, who is a big Roll Tide Alabama fan, asked us on the show last week what we thought Bama had to do to host. And I think we said, or I guess I said, because we had some technical difficulties, but they need to win their next 2 series. So take at least 2 out of 3 in the last 2 weeks, and then make a run in Hoover. And they took 2 out of 3 this weekend from Georgia, who was number 6 at the time. Bama's up to number 18 in the rankings. Now, the rankings are not, if you finish the season ranked in the top 16, that you're not guaranteed a spot to host. But I think, potentially Bama could, if they close out the season well. They've got a series this coming weekend at Florida, who is also surging, that we brought up. So if they could take 2 out of 3 on the road from Florida and then make a run in Hoover, potentially I could see the Tide hosting a regional, which would be huge for them.
Yeah, without a doubt. I'm glad you mentioned them, because I was going to mention them as well. Just Alabama seems to be surging. They've been hanging around, from 15 to 24-ish almost all year. But they seem to be getting hot at the right time. I mean, taking a series from Georgia this late in the year, the way Georgia's been playing, and, with Georgia in the top 10, in and out, on the edge of the top 10 and in the top 10 for most of the season, that's a big series win, especially when you need it, right? Your back's kind of against the wall. Do you want to host or do you not? And they're saying we want to host. That was a big statement. Now you got to just keep it rolling, right? Like you said, going to Florida, another really hot team right now. So that is a good segue here into our big series this weekend, which is we got Tennessee heading to number 8 Arkansas. That one's in Fayetteville. Got Kentucky, which Hammer just mentioned. Had a great series win this past weekend. They're heading to Vanderbilt. Also had a great series win last weekend. That one's in Nashville, so that one's going to be a great series. Should be hard fought. And then the big one of the weekend to me is 18 Alabama headed to Gainesville to take on Florida at number 23. Both of those teams could really use a series win. And if Alabama can get it done, I think you're right. They're well on their way to hosting a regional, especially if they can get a couple as well in Hoover. And then the Red River rivalry as well in Norman with Texas heading to Oklahoma for that one. That one should be a great series as well. Anything that you're watching out for in any of these series?
Yeah, I mean, you kind of nailed it. I think very interested to see what Tennessee does. That's a team that frankly needs to win this series to try to host. If we're talking about hosting, where Alabama's potentially, sneaking up to host, Tennessee has been doing the opposite where, they were number 1 earlier in the year. They've really been top 5, certainly top 10 all year until the last 2 weeks. And they keep losing series. And of course it doesn't get easier going to Fayetteville to play, a top 10 Arkansas team. But if they lose that series, I really don't see how they host, which, it's still a very good team. So that doesn't rule them out for any sort of postseason run. But as anybody will tell you, hosting, it's a big deal for your fans because you get a ton of baseball in your stadium, not just your own team, but it's a great weekend. Yeah. But, it also helps. So we see it all the time where teams that don't host make runs. But obviously, if you're Tennessee and Tony Vitello, you want to host, especially being the defending national champions. So that would be a pretty big fall for them if they're not able to. But again, at this point, I would almost expect them not to because Arkansas is playing good baseball. It's in Fayetteville, very tough place to play. But if they can get a series win there and then similar to Alabama, maybe win a game or two in Hoover, I think Tennessee will host. But it'll be interesting to see.
Yeah, it definitely will be. Just to kind of put a bow on that, Arkansas has also had their issues, right? Especially early in the SEC slate. They lost a couple early series there, lost a series to A&M. And then they started to figure it out, these last couple series when they swept Texas. I think that really gave them a shot in the arm. But Arkansas is vulnerable. They're very beatable. And Tennessee, like you said, is talented. They just, for whatever reason, haven't been able to get it done in these last 5 series. But that's one thing to note for Tennessee fans. You touched on it. It got me thinking because I'm actually in Charlottesville, Virginia right now for our brother's graduation, which is coming up on Saturday, I'm told. But the reason I say that is because UVA, the University of Virginia, in 2015, they were kind of on the outs. They kind of squeaked in, I can't remember if they hosted a regional or not, but they were not playing great baseball going into the College World Series into the tournament and made a run all the way to Omaha. And then they won the whole dang thing. Yeah. And if you ask anybody around UVA or, Charlottesville, folks who keep up with UVA baseball, I don't think any of them by midseason, or even 3/4 of the way through the season would have said that team was going to win a national title. I don't think that there was multiple other UVA teams over that span of that decade that you would have pointed to and said that team is more talented. That team should have won a national title, and they didn't, right? But that 2015 team did because they got hot, and baseball's a streaky game. So, Vols fans, I know it's been tough lately, watching your team lose all these series, but don't give up on them yet. I remember just a few weeks ago, I was watching a Tennessee game. This was probably 3 or 4 weeks ago, and the ESPN crew, I forget who it was who was on the call, but they were just talking about, hey, does Tennessee have what it takes to win the national title? And the color guy immediately was like, yes, this team is super talented. Tony Vitello is a hell of a coach. They won it last year. These guys can do it. So I know it seems a little shaky right now, but if the Vols can get hot, I think anything is possible for that team.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, you brought up the UVA example from 2015. Ole Miss, whatever it was, 2-3 years ago, was a 4 seed in a regional. Like, from what I recall, they were, quote, the last team in, and of course, go on to win the whole thing. So it does happen, but again, you want to host. They have a great environment in Knoxville. The fans are awesome, and I think they really feed off of that as a team. Or maybe not. Maybe they feed off the road crowd because those guys like to talk smack. So maybe if everybody's against them, they're more comfortable. I don't know, but yeah, it'll be interesting to see. I mean, it should be a very fun final weekend, and then Hoover is always a great time, including the I haven't checked the weather, but we're always due for some serious weather delays in Hoover every year.
Yeah, that's the truth. So, okay, the last thing we want to get to here, and sorry, folks, we didn't have time to get to a Biscuit of the Week or to a Must-Champ Coach of the Week, so we'll have to kick that to next week. We will be sure to have those for you next week. Cross our fingers, but that's the plan. And but we wanted to get to a little bit of baseball hot seat talk because with the season winding down, I think there's a couple coaches, like I said at the outset of the show, that are kind of staring down the barrel of a potential change, a potential firing, potential coaching change. The three names that come to mind to me right off the bat, and I think they're pretty obvious, although one is kind of surprising to me, but I guess it's understandable considering what has happened and transpired over the course of the last 4 series or so. But the first one is Michael Early at Texas A&M. As Aggies, we were coming into this season and we were all excited and it was looking good. And then the wheels fell off like immediately. And, the fact that this team, I don't know what the losses are at this point, 24 losses or 23 losses at this point. Frankly, it's just unacceptable. It's looking like A&M will not make the postseason after you get swept by Missouri. That just can't happen after Missouri's winless in the SEC. Some people were calling them potentially one of the worst Power 4 teams in college baseball history, and they walk into your stadium and win and sweep you. Just a terrible look after A&M caught some momentum and was starting to win series, and against big names. They won the series against LSU. They won a series against Arkansas. And they won another big series too that I'm forgetting right now. But they then get
free from LSU. A&M did.
Yeah. That's okay. I mentioned LSU. I mentioned Arkansas.
Oh, sorry.
Tennessee.
Yeah.
Tennessee. So they win 3 big series, but then there's these, the highs are high and the lows are low with A&M. And Aggie fans are really just frustrated with this because the talent is there. It's almost the same team, minus a couple guys that went to the College World Series last year and were within, a couple runs of winning the whole daggum thing. And now it's on the verge of not even making the postseason for this one. And Michael Early's a young guy. It's his first season. Personally, I like the guy. I think he could be a great coach one day, and maybe they give him another season to just see what happens. But the issue is, I don't know what A&M's recruiting looks like, but this is one of those seasons that is so bad that you wonder if it's starting to affect recruiting, which if that's the case, that's the lifeblood of a program. And I don't think that Trev Alberts will have a choice but to make a change.
Yeah. I'm with you. Obviously we are Aggies. I really hate to say this because I like Mike Early and, the cards that he was dealt were tough. Having, he was on that staff with Schloss, who left the day after the national title. It got leaked the day of. And, he initially went to Texas because what else are you going to do when you're an assistant coach and your head coach leaves? You follow him. And then ultimately, was brought back, 3, 4, 5 days later to take over the team. And it does seem in hindsight that unfortunately he was just not ready because A&M started the season number 1. The talent is there. They have had some injuries with, Gavin Grahovac stands out as a guy who was a freshman All-American last year, big bat in that lineup. And I think he maybe played like 2 or 3 games and then he tore his shoulder up. So that is tough, but you cannot miss the postseason. I mean, they're breaking records for how bad they are. Based on expectation, right? Not that they're one of the worst teams ever, but they're the fastest number 1 to ever fall out of the rankings. And if they ultimately don't make the postseason, which it seems they won't, they will be the first ever preseason number 1 not to make it. So you're looking at some historical precedents that are really, really, really bad. And I'm kind of with you. Like this to me, if he was to be fired, let's say 4 or 5 years from now, how I would have imagined it going is we have a great year this year. We're pretty good next year. And then it ultimately kind of falls off because he's just not that good of a head coach. For it to go this poorly when the talent is there really does not look good on him. And I'm with you. I don't really know what other option Trev Alberts has. I mean, that this series the past weekend was, I don't know how it's not a nail in the coffin. It was really pathetic. As an Aggie, I love A&M baseball. I love the guys on the team. I like Mike Early, but that just was so uninspired, lifeless. I mean, they looked totally lost, beaten down, and maybe it is just all the outside circumstances that finally got to them. I don't know, but that's your job as a coach to not let that get to your team. And clearly he has not been able to do that. And, to bring it kind of full circle here back to what I brought up at the beginning, that the way it all went down last year was slosh and then ultimately bringing Early back. Trev Alberts, his hands were kind of tied. He was new on the job. He had just taken the job, I believe, in March after Ross Bjork left. So he'd been on the job 3 months, which I'm not an athletic director, but you have a hell of a lot going on when you take a brand new job. And for his baseball team to be in the College World Series, lose by 1 run in Game 3, and then the very next day lose his head coach while he's still trying to get his feet underneath him. And by the way, everything else is set. It's the same thing we see in football or anything, right? If you go to the championship game, the coaching carousel's done. Everybody's found their coach. There's nobody available really that you would want. So his hands were kind of tied of like, man, who am I going to go out here and hire other than this guy who clearly wants the job, and all the players are telling me we want this guy to be our coach. And so I think he made a move that in hindsight was bad, but at the time, like I think it was a good choice given the circumstances. All that to say, that's not the case this year. You could get ahead of it. You could get a guy that you want to be the next head coach. You could do an actual legitimate coaching search. And I think ultimately that's what will happen.
Yeah, I think that's where we're headed as well. Okay, so let's get to, we got 2 other names here that we need to discuss before we get off. So we'll probably go a little bit over time here. But the one that I was talking about a little bit earlier that I alluded to before we got into Mike Early was Paul Maneri at South Carolina. So it's Coach Maneri's first season at South Carolina. And, he was a longtime coach at LSU. He was there for a long time, won a lot of games, did a lot of great stuff at LSU.
Won a natty.
Won a national championship. So he retires and gets out, and then they go and hire Jay Johnson, and it looks like Maneri's going to be done, right, in college baseball. He's had a great career. What's the reason to come back and do anything? Well, surprisingly, he was ready to coach again. And South Carolina went out and tasked him with rebuilding the baseball program and bringing them back to their former glory, which South Carolina baseball has a proud tradition. 2 national titles.
Yep.
It's been a while. It's been 8 to 10 years really since the team has been at that sort of level. But Maneri has a pedigree, right? So bring this guy in. Let's see what he can do. Well, this year it has not gone very well, to say the least. And it has gone so poorly that there is a lot of chatter, especially in Gamecock circles, that we need to be one and done here. Like, we got to get rid of this guy, and we got to find somebody. Like, his time has passed, basically, and we need to find somebody, of a big stature, with a good pedigree, maybe who's a little bit younger, who can lead this baseball program for the next 10 to 15 years and bring us back to being where, like, the Georgias of the world are right now, right? And some of those in Arkansas, right? Like, this is a South Carolina team. It's a program that feels like they should be in the top 10 every year, competing for the College World Series and national championships. And I think that's a totally fair expectation for this program, and they're not there. They've lost, I think, their last 3 series, and the one that was so embarrassing was, you talked about lifelessness for A&M against Mizzou. Talk about lifelessness against Auburn for South Carolina. On May 8th, they lost 24-2, got run ruled in 7 innings by the Auburn Tigers. So I kind of wonder, and I think a lot of South Carolina fans after that one were like, nail in the coffin. Like, this is done. Did not work out. We hired a national championship winning coach. He did all these great things at LSU, and it's just not, his time has passed.
Yeah. I'm very interested to see if they do pull the trigger on this, just being that it is his first year, but I'm with you. And I have seen the chatter out of Columbia as well. And I think the problem that Maneri is up against is not just that they've had a tough first year. I mean, they're 5-22 in the SEC. It's been a very bad year.
They've lost some tough ones too, right? Like the A&M series, they had A&M on the ropes in all but one game. And A&M hits 2 grand slams. It's crazy. So, but anyway, continue.
Well, yeah, but what I was really going to say is that when he was hired there was a lot of that chatter already, being that his time has passed, right? I mean, there's a reason he's not at LSU anymore. They made the tough decision to fire him. He'd been to Omaha 5 times. He won 1 in however long. I think it was 17 years at LSU. So, like, fantastic resume. But his last trip to Omaha was 2017. They, really kind of struggled in 18, 19, 20, 21, just struggled by LSU standards, but we're not that good. And LSU made the tough decision to axe a guy who had been great for them, but they felt like times have passed him by, and we're not going to get back to where we want with him leading the charge. And then 4 years go by, and then South Carolina hires him, right? And so I see the logic in the hire, but I also think it's very easy now, similar to the early situation in hindsight, to go, we should have seen this coming. This was a bad hire. One and done, doesn't matter. Like, let's cut bait here because this is not going to work. It's one of those things. I can't remember who it is. There's some athletic director who's famous for saying, like, something along the lines of don't delay a decision because of the timing, right? Like, if the decision is right, make it regardless of the timing or the circumstances. And so the reality is, I think it's Ray Tanner, the AD there, like, most people seem to think that he is not going to be the guy to turn it around. And so to do it after 1 year, some would say is rash, but if the decision is right, then the timing doesn't matter. So I wouldn't be shocked to see them move on, just because the writing is kind of on the wall. I think if he stays, it's not going to get turned around. And I think they probably know that. And I think you can kind of see that again, like you mentioned, the Auburn series, like, kind of lifeless. They're not really playing for him, which is unfortunate. But I think it seems like a situation where he's kind of lost the team.
Yeah, I'm with you. So yeah, there could be a tough decision in Columbia coming up too. Now we go to the other Columbia to finish us up. And so Mizzou, Mizzou this year has had a terrible season, except for the last weekend when they swept our Aggies. Good for them. But
Yeah.
Hey, we get it, guys. That's a classic Aggie thing. Like just to do something stupid like that. We are self-aware for sure. So.
Right. The team is 0-24 in the SEC. Not only do they get their first win, just go ahead and sweep us because we're used to being the punching bag and just getting beaten down.
Yeah, stick a fork in us. We're done. So Carrick Jackson, it's his second year at Mizzou in Columbia. His overall record at Mizzou is 39-67. He's been to the NCAA tournament twice. Overall head coaching record 115-162. In 2023, he was at Memphis for one season before Mizzou hired him. He was also an assistant at Missouri from 2011 to 2015. So he had some relationships there, which I think probably helped him get this job. And then from 2018 to 2020 at Southern, he was the coach there. So overall, he wasn't great at Southern. He was 47-67 there. However, they did make an NCAA regional in 2019 and won their conference that year. But that's really his best year. He was 29-28 at Memphis. They were tied for fifth in the American Conference. And then since then, I mean, he's 12-45 in the SEC. They're 16-35 this year with 3 wins in the SEC. I haven't heard too much rumblings about his job status there, but it just kind of makes you wonder. I mean, here's the thing about Mizzou, right? Like they don't have a great baseball pedigree by any means. I mean, they did win the College World Series in 1954. And then they've had 6 College World Series appearances. All of those came between 1952 and 1964. So the last time they had an NCAA tournament appearance was in 2012. So it's been a while. I think Mizzou hired him to really be a program builder, and like this is going to take time. But are we really seeing progress? I don't know that we're seeing progress at Missouri. 23-32 in year one in 2024, 16-35 this year. So they're going to end in all likelihood with a worse record than they did in their first year. I mean, look, I know Mizzou, I don't think that baseball is a priority, but if you're a proud athletic department, baseball is one of the top 3 pillars, right? It's football, basketball, and baseball. And the SEC cares about baseball. So I don't think Mizzou wants to be bad at any sport. And right now they are terrible at baseball. So you got to bring it up. You got to wonder if Carrick Jackson's going to be there next year.
Yeah, I'm with you. In all honesty, he may have saved his job this past weekend because I think, look, if you go winless in conference play, I think you're forcing your athletic director's hand to say, we're done here. But I think, you brought up Mizzou. I just don't know if they're ready to make that call because they don't have a proud history. There's quite likely, Mississippi State jobs already open, A&M likely to come open. Like there's some other big hitters that are going to grab guys that, Mizzou would potentially want that they would, not be able to compete for. And I think, one thing that stands out to me, which makes me think they may give him some more time, is the comment a couple weeks back from the Mizzou AD, where he just said, we have not invested in baseball enough. And so I think he probably understands that both from a, athletic department standpoint and probably an NIL standpoint, they are not competitive with Texas, LSU, Arkansas, you name it. These programs that are really, really, really strong in baseball. And so certainly that's not a vote of confidence for Carrick Jackson, but I kind of took it that way in the sense of like, okay, this AD is self-aware enough to know that, yes, they're having a historically bad year, but it's probably has a lot to do with their investment. Now, whether they care enough to invest, like you mentioned, we'll see. But I think he probably hangs on again, because now at least they're not winless. I don't know what the worst conference record of all time ever has been. But at this point, they're only 2 games, back from South Carolina, who's 5-22. So they got the monkey off their back, and I think he probably keeps his job. But again, I would not be shocked if they, if they think they can go hire somebody better. I'm sure they will. It's just a matter of where they see themselves in the pecking order, and what their relationship with Jackson is, if they think he's possibly still the right guy. But I think if I had to bet on it, I would say he's back next year.
I think that's probably fair. That was my question too, is the investment. How much is really being invested in Missouri baseball? And I was not aware of that comment from the AD. So that would make sense. And that would probably be the reason you're not hearing as much chatter out of Columbia about, a firing and a head coaching change for their baseball program, probably because they feel like they haven't given him enough, like the real resources to win, which is obvious from their record. So,
yeah.
Okay, well, that will do it for us tonight. That was a great show. Really enjoyed talking about all that. We will have plenty more to talk about on the diamond, especially over the next couple of weeks. So be sure to join us next week as well. We will be back here same time, same place for Biscuits and SEC Live. Also, be sure to sign up for our newsletter, as we mentioned at the top of the show, biscuitsandsec.com/newsletter to sign up. That's the Morning Biscuits newsletter from Biscuits and SEC, written by Hammer and myself. That comes to you on Wednesdays during the off season, and then during the season, it's on Mondays and Fridays as we get into football season, because there's just so much more news, and we're all SEC fans. So obviously, football is the name of the game in this conference. Also, want to thank the Steer Agency for sponsoring us tonight for another great show. We really appreciate them sponsoring us. Finally, also be sure to subscribe to us on YouTube, and we're trying to grow that channel, and subscribe to the SEC After Dark channel as well. We will be on SEC After Dark tomorrow, which is going to be at 9 o'clock Eastern, 8 o'clock Central. And also be sure to follow us on social media. We got at Biscuits and SEC across platforms, whether you're on LinkedIn. Just kidding, we're not there. But Instagram and X. You can follow us there. We always are, opining on different things. We got to update our Instagram, but we will get to that soon. And then other than that, really enjoyed it tonight. Thank you guys all for joining us. It's been a blast. For Hammer, I am Boss Man, and we will see you guys next week.
All right. Appreciate y'all.